Hi, my name's Joey. I'm an organizer here at WPEA, and today I'm going to cover kind of the broad structure of our union and some of the rights that you have under our collective bargaining agreement. So I'm going to cover a lot in this like 30 or 45 minutes. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below or reach out to your rep or reach out to your stewards. We love answering questions. So let's jump into it. So if you've never been a part of a union before, let me just explain kind of like what unions are. So here in America, we have a variety of rights that come from various places. So we have federal level rights that are set, in Washington, D.C., and they affect pretty much everyone, regardless of where you are in the country. Then we have state rights, and those are set at the state legislature, and those can go above federal rights, like they can expand upon them. And in that same sense, if a group of employees ever gets together and signs union interest cards, they then get to negotiate what is called a collective bargaining agreement. Sometimes it's called a union contract. And that's where they can negotiate additional rights that go beyond the federal and the state, that expand upon them. Now, each of those groups gets to renegotiate that contract during a set time. Here at WPA, most of our contracts are negotiated every 2 years in line with the state budget cycle, but the libraries, they bargain every year. So let's jump into it. So if you've never been inside of a union before, you're brand new, how do you fit within the structure of our union right now? So when you're first hired, you're a member. And as a member, we often say that you are the voice of the union. And that's because not only is your work that you do really unique, like, yes, we have program coordinators, and we have probably multiple program coordinators at each college, as well as multiple positions at each bargaining unit. But your work is probably going to be unique in some way. But beyond that, like, you as a person are unique. Like, maybe you have kids, maybe you have to take public transportation. Who knows what is going on in your life and how that meshes with the unique work that you have to complete. And because of that, you have kind of a special outlook that absolutely nobody else is going to understand except for you. And so when we negotiate rights, or when we're looking to expand upon like how this whole system works, your unique perspective is really important because, again, nobody sees that but you. Now, when a lot of voices get together and all speak with the same voice and move in the same direction, we call that collective action. And it is the tool through which all union power derives. But if you've ever tried to host a party with 30 fully functional adults, and tried to get them all to like bring a specific dish, arrive at a specific place at a specific time, like I do, it sucks. Getting a bunch of people to do the same thing is horrible, and it takes a lot of effort. So to that end, we have a variety of volunteer positions here in WPEA, and so I'm going to go over kind of what the roles are called and what they're responsible for. So first, we have what's called a member leader. So this is going to be a volunteer coworker of yours. They're going to be more informed about the contract and your rights under them. And if we ever do have to move to collective action, they're going to be the best first points of contact to find out what's going on, what has happened before, where we're going, and how you can help. Now, after a member leader, we have another role called a steward. So a steward, very similar to a member leader in that they know more about the contract and your rights under it, but they also know how to enforce those rights, and they can actually represent you whenever you're talking with either your supervisor or another member of management. And I'll get into what that looks like in just a bit. Now, some bargaining units, and when I say bargaining unit, we have, like 30 or more at WPEA, but broadly, if you are working at Pierce College, your bargaining unit is Pierce Classified Staff. Most of our employers only have one bargaining unit, though some have two. They'll have it for regular classified staff and supervisory staff, but generally speaking, your bargaining unit is probably just going to be your employer, like Department of Natural Resources, Department of Revenue, etc. Now, some bargaining units have a lot of stewards. And so they elect to have something called a steward leader, or sometimes it's called a chief shop steward. Something important to remember about this role is that it's really no different than a regular steward. If you hear someone say, hey, that's the chief shop steward, it's just that the group likes that person is really well organized. And so they kind of like run the steward meetings, or they help handle logistics, when a bunch of people are trying to do different things. But outside of that, they're just a regular steward. Now, both stewards and member leaders are really vital roles to make sure that we have good communication inside of our union, and that we can enforce the rights that we have under the contract. But both of them are susceptible really to two big problems. So the first is in scheduling. Since these are all volunteer coworkers of yours, if you either have a question about your rights or if you need a representative, they might not always be available. They might be busy doing the job that the employer hired them to do. The second thing that they're susceptible to is retaliation. So if you ever have like a really hostile or contentious employer, if they want to undermine those rights that you have under the contract, the first thing they're going to do is go after the group who are enforcing those rights. And it's for that reason that if you do ever have a hostile or contentious employer or supervisor, the stewards might be a little scared to push back against that person. They don't want to get demoted. They don't want to get fired. They don't want to, have their working conditions changed solely because they're trying to enforce rights. And early unions figured that out pretty quickly, those two weaknesses. And so that's why we have a position called a staff representative. Now, the idea here is that every union member pools a little bit of money together every month in a pot, and it funds someone's full-time position. And that addresses those two problems. So a staff representative's full-time job is representation and answering questions. So if you ever have a question to ask, or if you need a representative, they should always be available to help you. And in addition, since they are hired and fired by the membership, more specifically the union president, they have no connection to your employer, which means that if there ever is a hostile or contentious supervisor, or if the entire employer has gone in that direction, the staff rep has no fear of retaliation. They can push as hard as they want, and they can be a lot more aggressive if the stewards are a little more scared to approach that person or that group. Now, I've used the term membership a handful of times, but I think it's really important to differentiate. We actually have two different types of member. So the first type is called a bargaining unit member. So if you're watching this video and you were hired into one of our positions, congratulations, you're a bargaining unit member. That part is automatic. You don't have to do anything. As a bargaining unit member, what that means is that those rights under the contract are your rights. It also means that if you ever need a representative, we will always provide one to you. So long as we've got money in that bank and we've got staff reps hired, we're going to give them to you. But the other type of member is called a dues-paying member, or sometimes it's called full union membership. And that's someone who's paying into that pot to fund the staff reps. Now, while we are always going to provide a representative for absolutely everybody who asks for one, our ability to represent is always going to be tied to how many people are paying into that pot to fund the staff reps. So for perspective, today, and this is January 2025, our membership numbers currently, we have about 51% of our membership who are paying into that program. And that means that we can afford 7 staff representatives. And here at WPEA, we're about 5,500 members. And that means that our staff reps are responsible for about 800 to 1,100 employees on average. And that means that each one of those reps is responsible for multiple employers. And that usually means that, like, if you need a representative, they're going to have to do it virtually. Most of the time, they're not going to be able to be there in person unless it's a really extreme situation. And then they have to drive a long way. But by comparison, if we had every single member across our union paying into that program, we'd be able to hire about 3 times as many staff reps as before, which means that just about every single one of our employers would have a dedicated staff rep that could be there on site far more frequently. So how much are those dues to pay into that program? So nationwide, dues are 1% to 2% of your gross salary. Here at WPEA, they're 1.25% plus a base $16, and that goes to our international union, and I'll talk about who they are in just a minute. And then there's a monthly maximum of $85.46. So regardless of what day it is, nobody likes doing math at any point in time in the day. So to save you that struggle, here in 2025, minimum wage is $16.66. So if you work 40 hours a week at minimum wage, your dues are going to be about $52 a month. And you're going to hit the dues maximum if your classification pays about $31 an hour. And you work full-time 40 hours a week. Now, what do those dues pay for? I said that they do fund the staff reps. We have 7 of those, but I'm going to go over some of the other things that the dues also fund. So we have 15 positions here at WPEA, 7 of those being staff reps, but we also have a president, and that's usually a member who gets elected. We have an accountant. We have a member coordinator who alters the database. We have a person who sends out physical mail. We have 2 organizers, me being one of them, and a handful of other positions. But outside of staff, the dues actually fund a lot of other things. So one example of that is something called arbitration. So whenever your rights are violated, we file what's called a grievance. That grievance has multiple steps, the final step being something called arbitration. So you can think of arbitration kind of like court, and because it's like court, we have to pay for an arbitrator, room fees, recorder, and a variety of things. It does cost a pretty penny each time we do that, and we file about 80 or 90 of those a year. Another thing that your dues pay for is a public-facing website. We want to make sure you know who your staff reps are, who the stewards are, what recent news is going on. And like as fast as I try to talk inside of this initial orientation, there's lots of topics that I don't have time to cover, like what is collective action, why do we have an executive board, how does the bargaining process work, etc. So we want to have a place for trainings. So it does cost money to host a website, and it costs money to pay someone to maintain it. That's also me. I'm also the website guy. I'm not just an organizer. I also do all the IT work here. Another thing that your dues fund is physical mail. So whenever you sign up to pay dues, we want to send you a shirt. We want to send you some other WPA stuff. That costs money whenever you ship stuff. But in addition to that, whenever we renegotiate those contracts, we are required by law, since we are state workers, to vote on those contracts either by certified election mail or through in-person voting. And both of those options are pretty pricey. And we have 8 different contracts here at WPEA that we have to do that for. We also fund employee assistance programs through the dues. We fund a scholarship program that our members and their family can apply to through the dues. And we do bargaining unit celebrations every once in a while. So if you were to ever reach out to us and say, hey, Joey, I've got a bunch of people here that I really want to get together to talk about some workplace concerns, but people don't like showing up. Can you please buy us a bunch of food to get people into the same room? Every time you ask us to buy food, we're going to buy food. Anything that helps to build community and bring people together to talk about issues, we're going to do that every time you ask us. And the last thing that your dues pay for, well, from the examples I'm giving, is membership to the International. So I'm going to talk about who they are for just a minute. So here at WPEA, we represent about 5,500 employees. That's across 15 community colleges, 9 governmental agencies, 2 libraries, and the legislative staff at the Senate and House Democratic Caucus. Now, to us 15 staff, those 5,500 people is a lot. That can be kind of overwhelming because of how few of us there are and how many we have to try to wrangle. But in the grand labor landscape, we're actually known as a small to medium-sized union. And that can mean some great things for you as a member. So that means that if you ever think that you don't like the direction the union's going in and you want to change that, it is a lot easier for you to do that just because there are fewer voices to contend with. It also means that in the labor community, we're known as kind of a scrappy union. And that's because we are very agile. We can pivot really quickly. If our members want to do a walkout, all they really have to do is say, hey, we've got everyone here who wants to do a walkout. Can we do a walkout? And it's super easy for us to get everyone in the same room and make that decision on the same day. And that can be really scary to employers because it makes it really tough for them to have foresight in what we're going to do. But that kind of is where the benefits end of being a smaller union. Since we're smaller, the majority of our funds go to funding the staff reps to enforce rights and to paying your coworkers who negotiate changes to those contracts. Because when they negotiate those new contracts, they're not paid. Some of our contracts let them be paid for a few days, but definitely not the entire bargaining process. So we want to make sure that they still get their regular salary through those times. And since that's where most of our funds go, it means that we don't have a lot of the cool stuff that bigger unions have. So if we ever need to move to strike, we don't have a big strike fund to access. And if we ever, once we send our cases to arbitration, we don't have a big team of lawyers to ask questions to make sure that we're taking the right cases to arbitration, because it does cost money every time we do that. And we also don't have a big team of organizers. So I'm one of only 2 organizers, and I've got to reach 5,500 people who are spread out across the entire state. So those are the problems that UFCW is able to help us solve. So by being a member of an international, they have 1.3 million members, and they have a very healthy strike fund that we can access if we ever need to move to strike. They also have a big team of lawyers, and since we affiliated with them in the early 2000s, the cases that we take to arbitration have been way more successful because we can ask those good questions. And when our membership numbers get low like they are today, like I said, they're about 51% across all of our union. When they get low, they send us physical people who can drive through the state and meet members where they are and talk face to face, which is ridiculously helpful. I mostly connect with people virtually because my commute time is like 5 seconds. But I have members like out in DNR that are hours away from any cell coverage out at a fire camp, and it is impossible for me to reach every single one of those sites. I would be on the road permanently and I wouldn't catch anybody else. And so it is ridiculously helpful that they're able to send us physical humans who can drive around and do that work. So if you've never signed up for dues, you can always do so at wpea.org/join, or talk to your rep or talk to a steward and they can get you a form as well. Now, I am going to go over what your rights are under the collective bargaining agreement, but first I want to make sure you're aware of what are called your basic Weingarten rights. So your basic Weingarten rights are your right to have a union representative present at any investigatory interview or any meeting or discussion that you reasonably believe could result in discipline. There are a couple things to remember here. So the first is that the employer has no obligation to inform you of that right. And some supervisors are nice and they'll say, hey Jim, this is one of those moments. Would you like to reach out to the union before we start this conversation? But a lot of the times that doesn't happen. So it really is up to you to say, hey, I'd like to put a pause on this conversation. I'm going to reach out to my union rep and get somebody scheduled to represent me so that we can pick this conversation back up as soon as possible. And really, once you use that language, the supervisor should stop asking questions, or at minimum, if they keep asking questions, you don't have to answer anything until you talk with your union rep. And that is the other thing to remember, is it is also your responsibility to reach out to us and to schedule that representative. And on the next slide, I'll show you how you can do that. But beyond your basic Weingarten rights, our contracts also have what are called expanded Weingarten rights. So that means that you have the right to a union representative to be present at any meeting or discussion that could adversely affect your conditions of employment. And I know that's a really broad statement, like what is a condition of employment and where's that line? So I'm going to try to come up with an example that I feel hits on at least a big group of our employees. Because I know that at least half of our bargaining units work in some kind of office setting. So let's say that like you've got your own office, you've got a desk, and the shredding company is charging way too much. And so management has decided, we're just going to get those cheap little Amazon shredders and we're going to put them in every single office and people can do their own shredding work. But they're kind of sizable, they're like 10 inches. So we need to squeeze that in between your desk. So your desk just needs to move like 8 inches to the left to make room for that. So that may seem like a really small change, but it is changes even that small that you can have a representative present. And it may seem silly, like why are we having a conversation about moving the desk 8 inches? Stop wasting time, Joey. Just do it. But it's helpful to have those conversations, to have someone in the room, or at least have someone to ask questions to, because the representative and the stewards know what your rights are under the contract. They know what the employer is required to provide for you. And they also have gone through a lot of those changes before, and they know what are good questions to ask. Like, let's say that moving your desk 8 inches means that, the power cord was over here on the side of the wall and you can't reach it anymore. So they just need to get you an extension cable. We need to make sure they do that before they move it. Or maybe you're on a laptop and you connect to a local Wi-Fi access point and you already don't get great data, but if you move the laptop 8 more inches, now you're going to be behind this big steel plate and you're going to get terrible, if no, reception. And so they need to either move that access point or they need to just get you a hard line so that you can get good data access. And that's really the biggest benefit of having a rep or a steward in the room when those discussions are being had, because they know what are those good questions to ask to make sure that you're set up for success after the change just as well as you were before the change. So if you're ever in one of those situations, how do you reach out to us? So I am about to drop a bunch of links, but just know if you just go to WPEA.org, everything I'm about to list is up in our upper right navigation as soon as you hit the page. So first, if you don't know who your staff representative is, you can go to WPEA.org/contact us. We have all of our staff reps listed there. We've got their name, their picture, their phone number, their email address, and the employers that they cover. But beyond that, if you want to know hey, who are the coworkers that I can reach out to? Who are the knowledgeable ones? So if you want to know who your stewards and member leaders are, you go to WPEA.org/units. There we have all of our employers listed. So you'd select your employer, whether that be Department of Natural Resources or Columbia Basin College. And on that page, you will see a full version of the contract that you're covered under. You'll see a list of stewards and member leaders at your unit, and you will see a leadership team email to use. And when you send a message to that leadership team email, it actually distributes it out to all of the stewards and member leaders. So if you either need a representative or if you just have a question, reaching out to your staff reps email and that leadership team email at the same time is the best way to get your question answered quickly or to get a representative scheduled as soon as possible. Now, I do give trainings every Wednesday at noon and at 5 because as fast as I try to talk in this orientation, like I said, I can't cover everything. But if you can't come to those trainings, I still want you to get that info. So if you go to WPA.org/training, I've got videos, I've got notes, I've got quizzes. Essentially, any way that you learn best, I want to try to make that available to you so that you can get that additional information, learn about what your rights are, how the structure of the union works, and how you can affect and change things so that this system works best for you. Now, we send out invites to those weekly trainings to your personal email. If you've never provided that to us, or if it ever changes, or if your phone number or address ever changes, the employer is not going to tell us. It is up to you. So you can either reach out to a staff rep, you can send a message to your stewards, or you can always go to WPEA.org/update and update your contact info with us. Finally, we put out a monthly newsletter. You can find those at WPEA.org/newsletter. And so that's the end of the kind of broad orientation. When I talk about the rights, I tried to make it as boring as possible. So you're just going to have to watch me. Sorry about that. But with this information that you've got so far, I want to hear in the comments, how do you feel about things that we've covered? And does all this kind of resonate with you? So now let's get into your rights under the contract. So what I'm going to go over today are kind of the broad rights, the things that are going to affect pretty much every employee that is hired. It's also important to note that we do have multiple contracts in our union. Like for example, we have the higher education contract that affects 13 of the 15 colleges. 2 of them are on individual contracts. We also have general government, that's most of our governmental bodies. And we have separate contracts for the libraries and for the legislative staff. So what I always recommend to everyone is to go to wpa.org/units, select your employer, pull up the full version of the contract that you're covered under, and just read the table of contents. That's going to list the titles of each article, and those titles are pretty self-explanatory, and you're going to be able to see which ones that you really want to read more into. Like for example, the vacation leave article, pretty important. Just about everyone should read that one in its entirety, just so you can understand the rules, all of the rules around vacation time. But you may find topics that I don't cover today that do primarily just impact you that you may be interested in. And that's why it's beneficial to read those table of contents. So let's jump into it. So first, our contracts have what are called appointment types and position types. The appointment type is just going to be regular or cyclic. Cyclic just means like you have summers off, you only work during fire season, that kind of stuff. Your position type, on the other hand, is likely to be permanent, but we do have a couple other position types. So we have project positions, and those are usually due to some kind of temporary funding. And if the funding source ever changes, we can get them converted to permanent. We also have what are called in-training positions, and those follow a development program. And when you're done with the development program, they automatically convert to permanent. But then we have what are called non-permanent positions. Now, non-permanent positions can only be used for a few reasons, like if someone's out on FMLA, or they can use them during a workload peak, or they can use them while they're hiring for the permanent position. But something to remember in non-permanent positions, if you are a permanent employee and you want to take a non-permanent position, maybe you're a maintenance mechanic 1, and there's a maintenance mechanic 2 position that comes up that you want to explore. Even if it's a completely different role and it's just something you want to explore, or if it just makes more money. As a permanent employee, if you accept a non-permanent position, you retain what are called reversion rights. And that means that at the end of your appointment, you will automatically convert right back to your old permanent position. And some of our contracts even allow you to break that appointment within 1 day if you just decide you don't like it. Like I know our higher education contract has that, but you can check your own contract for non-permanent appointments and see if you have that language as well. Now, most of our employees are considered overtime eligible, meaning you get time and a half pay for anything worked over 40 in a single week. However, some of our employees are still considered overtime exempt, but if you or anyone you know is told that you are overtime exempt, reach out to the staff rep. The exemption rules are actually changing through 2028. And by the time 2028 comes, the majority of our employees actually are not going to qualify to be able to be exempt. So at minimum, the staff rep will be able to tell you when that change will happen and when they'll be able to get you converted back to being eligible for overtime. Now, in addition to your base pay, which is going to be based on your classification and your step increases, our contracts also have various forms of premium pay. Again, these are different between each contract, so please look at premium pay or additional compensation inside of your contract. So some of the common ones that we have are, we have shift differentials if you're asked to work evenings or nights. We have standby pay if you're asked to be on call, and we have callback pay if you're asked to return to work outside of normal hours. So if any of those happen to you and you've looked in the contract and you know that you should be getting that premium pay and you don't see it on your paycheck, reach out to payroll first, see if it's just a mistake and if they can fix it. If it's not something that they're going to fix, reach out to the staff rep. We want to make sure that everyone is paid correctly for the work that they're performing. Now, every year, your supervisor is required to complete what's called a performance evaluation. So that evaluation process can be really collaborative, where you're both talking and filling out the form together. But if your supervisor ever just hands you the form and says, "Here you go, Jim, can you fill that out for me and just tell me how you did for the year?" As tempting as it may be to be like, A plus, A plus, A plus, A plus, A plus, I'm awesome, I did great this year. Please don't do that. We use those forms. If you're ever in like a disciplinary situation, or if we're trying to get you reclassified, we rely on those evaluations. And if you completed it yourself, it's kind of null and void. We can't use it. Now, what you can do is you have the right to submit comments on any evaluation completed for you. How you do that is you just send an email to the general HR inbox, comments on my latest evaluation, and whatever you write in there, they are required to file that right alongside your evaluation in your personnel file. So if you ever disagree with an evaluation, or if you just feel like, hey, I did a lot of awesome stuff this year, it ain't listed in there, that's a great way to either get a rebuttal or just some additional comments in an evaluation completed for you. Now, when you were first hired, you should have been given a position description, and that outlines the duties that the employer expects you to complete for the job they hired you for. However, if those duties change over time, that's a pretty natural thing to have happen. But if they change substantially enough to where you feel like, hey, I'm a maintenance mechanic 1, I'm doing all the same stuff as a maintenance mechanic 2, why am I not being paid as a mechanic 2? Well, then we need to file what's called a position review to try to get you reclassified. Now, in most position reviews, the supervisor is usually pretty supportive. They're the ones giving you that work. They know that it's advanced work and they want you to be paid correctly because they want you to stay at the job. However, most supervisors only complete a few position reviews throughout their entire career. So it is up to HR to determine if you get reclassified. It's not up to your supervisor. And so it's for that reason that if you're ever in that situation, reach out to the staff reps, reach out to the stewards. We want to get as many eyes on that process as possible. And every supervisor we've talked to has been very thankful to get help completing a form that they are unfamiliar with. So if you're ever in that situation, please reach out, get as many people involved. We want you to have the best chance possible for successfully getting reclassified. Now we have meal and rest periods as well. So if you're asked to work more than 5 consecutive hours, you're entitled to an unpaid 30-minute meal period. However, if you find that your workload is so high that you're having to regularly work through your lunch, reach out to your supervisor. They need to do one of two things. They either need to reduce the workload that they've put on you so that you can take your lunch every day, or if you volunteer to work through your lunch, they just need to approve the time that you have worked. So if you're already working 40, they need to approve the overtime, or if you're working less than 40, they just need to make sure that your time is being calculated correctly. Most of our employers will schedule people for 8.5-hour shifts specifically to address that 30-minute unpaid meal period. If your supervisor won't do one of those two things, reach out to the staff rep. We want to make sure that you're either able to take your lunch every day, or if you volunteer to work through it, we just want to make sure that you're paid for doing so. Now, we have a variety of leave benefits as well. So both full-time and part-time employees both accrue both vacation and sick leave. And you accrue those on a monthly basis, and your accrual rate is tied to how many years of service you have with the state, or I believe the library contracts do it based on your years of service with the library. Now, inside of the contract, under the vacation and sick leave articles, you'll see a little table, and that will outline what the accrual rate is based on how many years of service you have. Now, vacation leave can be used for pretty much whatever you want, but because of that, it can also be denied. However, if it is denied, many of our contracts have a piece that requires the employer to provide a written reason for denial within a certain timeline. Like, for example, the higher education contract is within 10 days of your request. And I believe some of our other contracts are within 14 days of the day you are requesting off. So please check your own contract to see what that rule is. But basically, when you look at that timeline of when they need a written reason for denial, if you're getting stressed about it because the supervisor hasn't approved your leave, if we're past that timeline, put it out of your mind. If they try to stop you, the first thing the staff rep's going to ask for is, where's my written reason for denial? If they don't have it, have a great vacation, Jim. We'll see you when you get back. Now, sick leave, on the other hand, can only be used for a few reasons. And because of that, it cannot be denied. So you can use sick leave if, well, you're sick. You can also use it if you have a doctor's appointment. You can use it if your kids are sick or have a doctor's appointment. You can use it if your babysitter cancels and you got to go watch your kids. You can use it for elder care if your nurse cancels and you got to go watch your father or take him to a doctor's appointment. You can also use it for bereavement and a handful of other reasons, all of which are listed in the sick leave article. Some of our contracts also allow for personal leave days. The higher education contract specifically has 3 of those. In addition to that, our contracts also have 11 paid holidays, in addition to 1 personal holiday if you celebrate a holiday not recognized by the state of Washington. And in a lot of our contracts, we also cover pay if your worksite ever closes. A lot of times this is due to either like wildfire smoke or a heavy snowfall, or in some cities, like 1 inch of snow. So a lot of our contracts provide pay for the first partial day and the first full day of any worksite closure. And after that, you can usually use just about any type of leave to cover any additional days, or your employer can approve remote work if your job allows that. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about today is the collective bargaining process. So whenever we go to renegotiate those contracts, one of your coworkers is going to volunteer to represent your bargaining unit in those negotiations. And it is really important that the entire membership knows how collective bargaining works, what we are asking for in that cycle, how it is going, and if it is not going well, how they can help move towards collective action to regain our power at the negotiating table. Because again, all of our power comes from our ability to coordinate each other so that we can all move in the same direction and say the same thing. The threat of withholding our labor is where the majority of our power resides. And if the employer does not believe that we are coordinated and organized, they really have no incentive to give us anything or expand upon those rights in any way. So if there is a problem at your work site, you should be wearing your union shirt on Wednesdays and reaching out to anyone you see not wearing either a union shirt or the color blue and saying, hey, do you know what the problem we're facing today is? Do you know what we're asking for? Do you know how it's going? And do you know how you can help? So I want to thank everyone for spending some time with me today to learn about just the structure of our union and some of the rights you have under your collective bargaining agreement. If you're new here, I would recommend that you reach out to your staff rep and your stewards through that email. Just introduce yourself and say hi. A lot of the times those steward groups have like really pertinent information about your bargaining unit that I don't cover at this orientation. These are broad topics that are pretty much everyone across the union. So please reach out to your steward group, reach out to your rep, see if there's anything that you should know about that's happening today. And again, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to seeing you at one of our future member meetings. Thanks so much. Bye.